So I'm the senior director of what we internally call the IDEA team, which is instructional design and educational architecture. So we're responsible for everything from the inception of what a professor wants to teach to the last knowledge nugget, we call, that gets archived or used again. And that's both the virtual space, like learning management, and the physical space, where they're actually going to teach, where the students are going to create assignments and work on problems. So we're responsible on the AV side, classrooms, conference rooms, huddle rooms, we call group study rooms, public spaces, as well as all of the software and hardware to allow for connected learning and things like that.
Great.
And I've been at the Wharton School for 15 years. Yeah.
Matt?
Mersive, Voya Financial, architect, technology at Voya. Pretty much anything collaboration or mobility falls underneath my management. Responsible for deploying, video conferencing rooms, collaboration spaces, even, event spaces within our real estate realm. 20 years experience in the integration industry. I was recruited by ING, who became Voya 6 years ago. And I spent the past 6 years kind of improving the culture, the collaboration culture at Voya.
Great, thank you. Michael?
My name is Michael Judah, the Regional Director of Technology here at Convene, where we all are. Thanks for coming down today. So Convene is, we like to build ourselves as the easiest place to host a meeting. So we are primarily a meeting and event space, but now we're also scaling in flexible work and office spaces. So we're looking at technology in a lot of different realms and platforms, one from a collaborative small huddle room, conference room, to full-on AV event and meeting production. So my role here is more at the corporate level of supervising the on-site property technology teams and technology experts, working our strategic partnerships, and looking for new products and best practices and ways to service our customers better.
Great, thank you. Chris?
I'm Christopher Janes. I'm founder and CTO of Mersive. My background's software. I came out of academics, so I think I kind of have at least a little bit of a unique view into the AV world just because I came out of a completely different space. Artificial intelligence, human-computer interaction, those are the technologies that I get really interested in, kind of get excited about. And then building products that make meetings better, I think is probably the easiest way to put it. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're gonna go to a panel format for about 45 minutes. I'm gonna leave some time for questions, so if you'd hold your questions till the end, we should be able to get to all of them. What's the #1 technology request you get from your end users for their meeting room collaboration experience? What do people ask you about the most?
More time in the room, right? So, and I say that partly in jest, because when people are working, they want to quickly, they only have so much time in a room, so they want to quickly be able to get to work. And in collaboration, it's really interesting that I primarily have students in a lot of the spaces, in the meeting spaces, so there's no boss, right? So they all have a kind of an equal say in what they want to talk about, how they want to share, and the outcomes of what they're working on is a collected work. It's not doing it for the boss and then the boss's assignment to hand in. Right. So they want to have equal time in working on a problem, and not to say they always run out of time. So they want to then be able to pack that all away, and then the next time they come back, they want to open that kind of back up like a folder and get right back to work. So that's the #1 thing they talk about. It's not a technology, it's just a behavior of how they want to work.
Right, so speed to connect, get the meeting started, yeah, be able to move quickly. Matt, what's your...
Yeah, I have to echo that a little bit because, again, it's just easy use, getting in, getting started. There was a study, and I forget who actually wrote the article, but on average, 15 minutes at the start of the meeting is wasted on trying to get the room up and running. So if we can alleviate some of those struggles right off the bat, allowing more time for people to collaborate. So, ease of use and availability is really what it comes down to for us at Voya.
Okay.
Yeah, I think reviewing this question with one of my guys earlier. I think the question, the answer I had was HVAC. I know that's completely unrelated, but the most common request is like temperature up, temperature down. Yeah. All joking aside, I think for us, it's interesting because there's the meetings and events side of it. Then there's the workplace customer and the huddles and things. Speaking to ease of use, our events clients are paying a premium to be on site, so they need to mitigate that downtime in that morning of getting their meeting set up, because that 15 minutes is 15 minutes of their agenda gone. So I think the biggest request that we're getting and we're seeing is that things are easy to plug in, easy to connect to, and that are supportable by the on-site team. I think leveraging that asset isn't always a commodity that they might have at their corporate conference center or another competitor to Convene. So I think the biggest request is the people that are there to support the technology needs when it doesn't always work.
You have a unique challenge because, unlike Dave and Matt, you have a completely heterogeneous, people come from all different kinds of companies. You don't know what their technology backgrounds or how they've been trained. Does that present some unique challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of hand-holding that has to happen as a result of that.
The ease of use being the big, okay.
I mean, easy to use reduces the amount of time that we have to physically spend in the room. That allows us to service the rest of our client base more. There might be someone who might need more attention in the morning than another client might.
Which makes Dave's point even more interesting, because in this environment, it's coin operated. So the faster you can start your meeting, the happier your clients are going to be. Yeah, that's interesting. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's probably a little bit unique because I'm not managing spaces, I'm managing a product line. But if you think about, if I want to list all the features that we continuously hear about, it's things like Miracast or better annotation systems. But the pattern I've seen in the market has really been about how does Mersive now expand its focus outside of the meeting proper, right? Because all the requests we're getting are things about how do I know the room schedule as I walk into that room, or how do I create consistency in that meeting so that the next meeting I can have some heritage that I take from that space. So if you really look at the pattern of feature requests we're getting, it's like Mersive. We think you've got the proximate use case figured out. The on-ramp's easy. People can use all the features. But now what do you do? Meeting boundaries, actually, there's kind of a mirror. There's an analogy happening in the space where meeting boundaries are kind of disappearing. It's harder and harder to know when you're in and out of a meeting. If you think about it, it used to be really easy. It was like, I just plugged in the PowerPoint cable. Here we go. Door closes. Some of us even remember the overhead slide projector turned on and the lamp's warm, meeting started, right? That's not the case anymore. So as it becomes more about as I move through my workplace and the display landscape, how do I engage with my displays and my content with my colleagues? So I think our product line has to start to expand pretty broadly.
Yeah. Well, you hit on an important thing too, is those meeting rooms aren't always using the technology,
right.
But your product owns the screen to some degree.
Right.
But the screen's useful for other things, relaying information, even if you're just an occupant in the room. It could tell you things about what's coming up, who's on campus, what speakers are available, just general, the next open space. As I said, meetings almost never end for students, so they just change from location to location. They can only own a location for so long. So it's just information about that. So I think that's hard to forget about a meeting spaces. Sometimes it's just a room with chairs, and you need to leverage that too.
Yeah, and that's when our product becomes kind of a passive technology that's supportive of pen and paper or shoulder surfing or whatever's going on in that space. But we definitely have to be aware of that trend, for sure.
That's a really good segue to my next question, which is, we designed the rooms, right? All of you designed rooms to be used a certain way. Are the rooms being used the way you designed them? And if not, why? And how are they being used? Because it is just a room with chairs. It might have, $200,000 worth of technology. But you see your rooms getting used the same way you designed them?
Well, I'm going to call foul. I think he should start. Spread the wealth.
Yeah, I'll start there. So, in corporate America, it's kind of pretty cut and dry, right? We have a couple flavors of rooms. One being a video conferencing room. Go in the video conference room, chances are you're going to do a video conference. We have just straight up collaboration rooms that we're calling presentation rooms with audio conferencing for those who just want to, join a conference call, collaborate. You got the screens there. Then we have, huddle spaces. And we also have places, open collab spaces, couches, chairs, screens, what corporate real estate calls genius bars, which are, bar top tables, Solstice, and that creates that ease of use for our customers, that ad hoc, no need to schedule your time to collaborate. You simply find one, walk up to it, and collaborate. So for the most part, I think that, yes, the rooms are used how we intended our users to use them. What I think we've done is given them more options on how they collaborate. Is it local? Does it need to be distance? Does it need to have, multiple sites involved? Then you're probably going to go with a video conference.
Right.
Is there a room, you have a pretty comprehensive taxonomy of room use cases. Is there a room that you don't have that people want you to have? Because that covers a lot of ground.
I think what our users were asking for goes back to the ease of use, right? So when we started redoing some of our main offices, that's when we started deploying those open collaboration spaces. That was an ask by the users, and the Solstice was the perfect fit for that.
Okay. Well, thanks. I wasn't trying to get a plug, but I appreciate it.
But
I'll see if I can come up with other questions, though, Mike. Thank you. Michael?
I think for us on the event side, we're challenged constantly by our clients because there's things that they can think of and possibilities for their events that we can never consider. So for us, our designs for our meeting spaces are extremely flexible, which makes them extremely complex. But again, we're taking that control out of the user's hand and we're owning it with our on-site subject matter experts. But we're always going to get pushed to the limits of what our clients are going to ask and what we're going to do and the kind of solutions that we're going to come up with. The utilization, and we're just really, we're starting to scale this vertical workspace, so we're starting to understand what the utilization is for huddle rooms and enclaves and little phone call rooms. And we built our corporate headquarters and within a week realized we needed about 3 times the amount of huddle rooms that we had needed initially. The demand for small meeting space, whether it was technology driven or just literally physically sitting in a space and having an analog conversation, we realized in a week that we'd already outgrown our space and our utilization as well. I think what's challenging for us too in the workplace, we're going to have a lot of different enterprise customers who are going to have a lot of different infrastructure, or they're used to maybe coming from a different environment where they have a conference center support. So I think we're going to learn a lot about how our spaces are performing and how they appease the masses and different varietals of enterprise.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Your comment about flexibility is an interesting one, because I don't have a lot to say about it because I don't track user spaces and how they get used in those different varieties of rooms. But you have to wonder, as software kind of replaces a lot of the hardware that used to exist in a lot of those rooms, you almost don't have to presuppose how the user is going to use it because you can be so flexible.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you're carefully picking $20,000 video switchers and really expensive overhead projectors, you kind of better know exactly what that's going to be used for, because you got to hit it right perfectly. But if it's a $2,500 huddle space that has software that drives it, and you can turn dials on that software, you can always be reactive to how users use it. It's just an occurrence to me when I'm hearing you guys talk. It's interesting.
And for us, it isn't about rooms that we don't have. It's uses that we haven't seen yet that people are doing in our spaces. One of our main classroom buildings, it's 60 huddle rooms, 50 classrooms, 40 phone booths, and I'll mention phone booths very specifically in a second, and it's 24 hours. The classrooms are 18 hours, everything else is 24 hours. So we don't have staff there to teach them how to use it or support it when it's broken. I mean, the rule at 4 in the morning is something breaks in that room, it probably is an empty room somewhere on that floor, so you go find it. But so it's from a reliability standpoint, and what they're doing at night is completely different than the teaching notion. They're holding a club. They're maybe they're bringing in a company to do on-campus recruiting unofficially, or guest speakers. And their reputation is tied to, our reputation is tied to their reputation. So we're always trying to make it flexible enough that they could show off by hosting, being able to host, by having the ability to host the space, by having the right to book it. But at the same time, easy enough that there's no support, after 8 p.m.
Right.
And that's just a reality. I mentioned the phone booths. It's a forgotten kind of thing. So we had a big problem of our huddle rooms being used by single students, and there's a rule, 2 can kick out 1. But we had all of these phone booths that didn't have phones in them anymore. They're acoustically built, right? They were built for private conversation.
Brilliant.
And at first we said, when all-in-one touch PCs came out, we said, we're hanging them on the wall. This is insane not to use this space. So every room got outfitted with an all-in-one touch PC. Then we found people kind of yanking at the one wire, trying to find the HDMI input to hook up their laptop. And we said, time out, let's stop that. So if you don't want to use the PC, let's just have a source switch, because all-in-one PCs are also monitors. So that second in became a pod. And so if they really just want to use their laptop, stop breaking our stuff. So that was a good use of wireless display in a very personal. So if you're in a space that has lots of phone booths, convert them.
And those are one-user.
These are one-user phone booths. Yeah,
wireless,
absolutely.
Not for collaboration, but for a single user to just cast content easy.
Yeah,
that's nice. Yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, over 30% of our student population is international. So they actually became Skype at first. Like they were like Skype stations at first. But very quickly, people realized, hey, I can do my work on a screen that's bigger than my laptop, because it had a nice 24-inch, screen inside in a phone booth. You can fit it.
It's a great point of the one user in a huddle room designed for 4 to 6 people, and I do that a ton if I want to take a private call, and you can feel the glaring eyes as they walk by, and they're looking at you like, this space is underutilized because you're sitting in there. And that could be 6 of us in there.
Yeah.
So Rob, that's the room we didn't have, which was a room for 1.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd not heard that one before. Yeah, and it's great feedback to know how people are using the room. They start breaking stuff. Yeah, it's like, okay, I get it now. That's pretty visceral.
Less touch points, the better. Yeah.
So and this is a tough question. I think Chris and I talk about this all the time. If in the corporate enterprise, in the university academic environment, we think that roughly about 40% of the IT budget gets spent in meeting spaces, right? Between OpEx and CapEx and furniture and energy and equipment, furniture, all that. A lot of that, of course, is the technology piece. Can you measure ROI in your meeting spaces? Is it possible to do that? And if it is, I'd love to know how you're doing that. How do you determine whether or not you put a $20,000 Surface Hub in there, or you do touch in some other way, or you've got a different style of furniture? I mean, how do you figure that out? How do you determine that?
Well, it's before you build the room. So we went through, when we refreshed our group study rooms a few years ago, we did A/B testing, just like how it would be software-based. We built rooms that faced sideways, and we built another room that faced the back wall. And one had a lot of wires and connections. Another one was a wireless software that was, well, I'll just use names, right? So one was a company called Wow Vision that, wow, they didn't really get that right. But that's beside the point. And then the click shares, which worked great, pretty expensive, but they worked pretty fine. We tested Air Media. We tested just collaboration. But we weren't just testing technology. It was the tables design. Did it fit 4? Did it fit 5? Did it have a head on it? Because, and I don't know about an ROI. For us, it isn't. Those rooms aren't to make money. They're there to be used, and so we can measure utilization, and we want from 7 a.m. until probably 9 p.m. we're over 90% utilized in all of our small meeting spaces. Right. So they have to be flexible. So we were testing the tush test, right? The comfort of the chair. What types of markers, low odor, we got a lot of feedback on that. And when about money being spent, food and alcohol go a long way when you want to get feedback, when you're doing these things. So we got a lot of participation from students and from faculty, from staff, who they all duck into these spaces and just said, what worked, what didn't work. And then once we had the design, then we rinsed and repeated, 60, 70 times across, our building.
Interesting.
Yeah, you have to give away a free iPad or something to get the surveys back.
That's a different survey, but yes.
So, I mean, for Voya, we do measure return on investment in a much different way. We do run metrics on room utilization across every single office, every single room we have. But on top of that, travel is a huge expense at any kind of, corporate environment. And we're always trying to get that reduced. So what we do is we figured out a formula and we tie a number to each participant in the video conferencing that alleviated having to travel somewhere. And, we also do carbon, footprint and things like that because Voya is very, environmental as well. And so that's a, trailing report, monthly report that comes out, and that goes all the way up to senior leadership.
So I think we're starting into the analytics game and get a better understanding of utilization and things. So for us, it's hard to really pin down the ROI. We have a target number that we like to consider we do everything by square foot. All of our projects, what we're spending on furniture, what we're spending on AV and amenities is down to square footage. So we have a target number that we'd like to spend per square foot, and that's kind of really what determines what's happening in this space. That calculation is based off of just data sets and revenue from years prior. So that's kind of where, if we're hitting that number and we're able to build the space within that number, that's where we feel like we're hitting our ROI. We do need to do a better job of tracking our utilization and real-time utilization, not just the calendar being booked, but are people actually showing up to the space on time? Are they staying in the space for the entire length of time? Right. They booked it for 4. Did 4 actually show up, or was it 1 versus 6? And that's the boundary that we need to start to push internally for Convene.
That's cool. Yeah, we've become really interested in this topic. We've talked about it a whole lot because we're building a product around it. I don't know if other folks on the panel know this, but really, for me, it's about utilization, like Dave mentioned and Matt mentioned, but it's also about what happens in the room once the meeting starts. Like, what was the relative contribution of a particular technology to the productivity in that space? It's hard to know that, but it's a really interesting question. Like, if I could know O365 is somehow more effective in a collaborative space than Google Docs was or whatever, it helps guide my future behavior. It helps me understand purchase patterns and their impact on really what's the bottom line and things like that. So we've started to look at a product we call Kepler now, where each pod in the space can measure behavior over time of that space. So what I mean by behavior, of course, is the things we can measure. Like, when did someone connect? What was the platform they connected with? How long were they connected with other users? And what's their share content ratio to hours in meetings, for example? And we put all that into this cloud account that you can then go visualize all that data and hopefully mine that data even from a classification and machine learning perspective to sort of close the loop to say, you know what, floor 7, where I love your HVAC comment, where it's 67 degrees, somehow is having better meetings than the 72-degree meeting floor. It's because if you can know that, you can drive future behavior and improve productivity. So hopefully we close that loop. It will take some changes in the product. One thing we're looking at is like an Uber swipe, where you go 5 stars for that meeting, and from a productivity perspective, disconnect out of Solstice and walk away, so that you can close the loop and say, okay, I'm starting to get patterns about where productivity is happening and what was the technology profile and the human-centered profile in that space. So.
What's interesting you said about, we call them the smile sheets. Another product that's software-based that we rely on a lot is Blue Jeans. Yeah. And at the end of every call, they ask you, how was your call?
Right.
We have 45% compliance in the smile sheet. I mean, 45% of the end participants in all of our calls actually rank the call. So we're getting a lot of data off of what perceived happipiness. But it's another interesting thing when you started talking about room utilization is we spend a whole lot of money on the system, right? But we've measured, and now we're really looking at it because we want to change our interface, is to say, how long did you interact with the interface vis-a-vis the rest of the length of your meeting time? So we do measure that to say, if it took 5 minutes, or if once you set up your room, did you ever make a change to the AV setup? Even, did you dim the lights? Did you raise the lights? Did you play with the shades? Did you change sources? Yeah, a lot of times the answer is no, right? Once the room is up and running and going, they're teaching. So now we can say, what was the setup that you really liked? For us, did you use side projectors and leave the center open? Did you just use the left? What was routed? Were you routing the Solstice pod on one source and the resident PC on the other? Were you just bringing in your own device? Were you not using any device, but just recording everything in your voice? So we could get a lot of information on that. But if you think about it, it's 5 minutes. So we spend all this money in a room for the first 5 minutes of the experience, and the rest, they're using the room and they're being productive. So we do measure that length of time of a meeting versus how much time they played with the system.
Yeah, I'm really glad you worded it that way because we're kind of in a unique place. Well, I don't want to use the analytics for my own benefit. You know, like a lot of the VCC companies, they're really looking for, should I change the way I routed this call and things like that. That's interesting. It's you know, traditional software kind of stuff to do. I'm more interested in supporting the behavior you just described, for you to have more data to make better decisions. So it's about you and your analytics portal, not me seeing that data. It's about you to do that exact thing, which I think is really cool.
Get a lot of data connection to your Fusion server because you can collect a ton of data from Crestron.
Yeah, well, we'll have an API where you can even throw in occupancy sensors or whatever into your Kepler portal and then do. You know,
I mean, do you really need to know if somebody was using a VGA or an HDMI? I mean, you know, it's, I mean, to a certain extent, but I mean, do you want to spend all this money and time to, you know,
what do you do with the data once you have it, and what can you really extrapolate from it?
I'm collecting data, but
things you could
applying it.
We got rid of VGA because we saw that nobody used it. That was another thing and another wire, another input into the system that we could eliminate. We got down in a couple rooms from, say, like a 16 by 16 matrix switcher to an 8 by 8 because there were just sources that weren't used. We built for flexibility. The flexibility never showed up. So, I mean, there was, you actually can find some savings by things that are never used that you thought was so important when you built it the first time, and then it just never panned out. So our dean has an expression about universities, really good at starting things and really bad at killing things. But we're pretty good at killing things because we have the data behind it to say, yeah, get rid of that.
Yeah.
I wonder if the cost of tracking outweighs the cost of the things that you end up VEing out as a result of that data, or if it ends up becoming a push. I'd love to see what the experiment looks like there, because we can say, it's saving us a bunch of money, but how many man hours, what was the infrastructure like to capture the data? Did those things balance it out? And how obtrusive was the user experience?
Tuned to your culture as well, you know, and how your users are collaborating. You can make some of those calls without having to go so deep into the analytics.
Totally agree.
You know, I think a lot of these rooms that we're talking about that are heavily integrated, they're really expensive to deploy. They're heavy rooms, and those rooms are becoming less and less. And I think the simple deployments are really what's bringing value to the end users. And I'm not saying you don't need a heavily integrated Crestron room or whatever manufacturer it might be. What I'm saying is you probably don't need as many of them as you think you need.
That's really interesting. I love your comment, though, about the cost of capturing the analytics can't outweigh the value it provides. That's got to be the call to arms for my own Kepler team, actually, because that's what we're focused on is how do we, one, do everything that just happens in that little box that you already have for other reasons that are really valuable. And secondly, how does that portal look and allow you to mine data that you're not spending an hour in there, you're spending 3 minutes, and it says, here's an insight for you today, right? A lightweight, let's go in there and look at what's going on in my meeting culture this week. What happened?
Well, sometimes it's answering what went wrong. I could imagine in your, what went wrong? Why am I not paying the bill?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
One of the things that we noticed in our market, wireless content sharing, products were launched into market probably about 5 years ago, 2013, Barco and Mersive, and shortly after that, Crestron. I know for most of us, when we launched the product, Wayne House at that time thought there was about 14 or 15 million traditional conference spaces. Today, the market is now sort of bifurcated between traditional conference rooms and huddle spaces, group study rooms, phone rooms. That's a new one. That's interesting. I guess I'm curious, and I hope that the audience.
We call them focus rooms now.
Focus rooms. I like that.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very millennial. I wonder if when we think about huddle spaces versus traditional meeting spaces, we always have a conversation. I'm curious to get your feedback. Are they the same? Is a huddle space just a smaller conference room, or are they different? The use case, the workflow, you know.
Yeah, you go. We're joking because we talked about this right before that. No, go ahead.
So, yeah, I mean, I think they are different. They're not just the meeting room. It's another way to collaborate, but the meeting rooms are, you walk to a room, you're having a meeting, you're invited to it, you go in, you shut the door, and all of a sudden that door's shut, and you're in that boardroom or meeting room, and it's a very formal environment at that point. To me, what Huddle room or any kind of open collab space is more informal, more comfortable environment of not being in that traditional, conference room where, you can collaborate much easier because you don't have that, pressure of, this is a meeting and there's X amount of people here, and you can just have your open discussions, and it's a little less informal of an environment than, you walk in the room and shut the door. So I think that's what those style rooms bring to the table, and that's why we've done open collab space. We've even taken it out, not even a room, right? It's just on the floor with soft seating, couches, end tables, and places to eat even. We have booths set up where people can eat their lunch, and at the end of the booth is a monitor, and you can connect to, Solstice Pod while you're eating and still collaborate. So it's not formal at all.
What does that mean in terms of the technology, though, Matt? So how does that manifest itself technologically?
I think that, so technologically,
I mean, these spaces have video. Are they just audio? Do they have neither?
They are strictly
proximate.
The open collab are strictly presentation, right? We're talking data, content on screen, immersive, going through your data, sharing multiple data points, and collaborating with your team. Now, the huddle rooms, back to the huddle rooms, yes, those are kind of multifaceted in a way that there's audio conferencing involved. We have some rooms with video, as well as the Solstice pods. So in the huddle room, you have a lot of different choices on how you want to collaborate. But it's still more of an informal environment. It's a smaller group of people. You're with your close team. And I think that when your team size is smaller, it's a little easier to convey your ideas and get your point across, and be more productive. How many times has everybody walked out of the meeting to have a meeting about the meeting? I mean, it happens all the time. I think when you're in a real collaboration setting, you achieve something out of it.
And for me, the difference between a huddle room and a meeting room is the boss can sit at the head of the table in a meeting room, and the screen sits at the head of the table in a huddle room. Right. A huddle room is more a democracy. There isn't a boss. Everybody has an equal say to share content, to have a say in a meeting. A lot of times you're facing each other much more intimately than you are in a meeting room where you can touch the other person's piece of paper at the table. The table depths are a lot different in a huddle room too, where in a meeting room it's more of a lean back and face the talker, whoever is speaking. People don't speak over each other in a meeting room. They'll do it in a huddle room.
It's more intimate.
It's much more intimate, and for us, you're either students that are on equal par, faculty that are on equal par, staff that all have one boss. We have such a flat organization. If you're in a flat organization, meeting rooms almost don't work. We don't have a lot of them. Therefore, our impression to make impression when corporate people come in, because that's the space they're comfortable with. But internally, we're almost always working in huddle rooms because everyone's on equal footing. And I think the physical design of that room makes it so no one is the boss. Right. So I would say that's a big difference between the huddle room and the meeting room.
Yeah. You have, I've been to a number of your spaces. I mean, Your room designs are gorgeous. They're cutting edge. They're beautiful. They're very well designed. A lot of them are Huddle-oriented spaces. I mean, what are you seeing?
It was funny about the Huddle rooms. I think a year or even 2 years ago, that was kind of the big buzzword in the industry. Like, here's this new emerging space. How do we tackle it? And most AV integrators, installers didn't want to touch it with a 30-foot pole because there was just no money in it, right? That typically you weren't installing a conferencing unit. It was very minimal. And honestly, what we found the biggest, because I've been challenged to build Huddle rooms cheaper, and I found that the biggest cost is the infrastructure for the Huddle room and not the AV technology in the space. Right. The backing, the electric, the data costs more than the screen, the phone, and the Solstice.
Because it's the same to every room. That's almost a fixed cost.
It's a fixed cost, exactly. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't really know what you want me to do unless we find a way to build these, physically build them cheaper, or find cheaper copper. I don't think we're going to be able to do it cheaper. But yes, I think there is a stark difference. And in our corporate headquarters, there's a conference room and there's a Huddle room literally right next door to each other. And so you can physically see the difference, the grandiosity of the conference room of a 12-person boardroom table. The chairs are appointed a little bit nicer. The credenza is outlaid with these really great tchotchkes. And then here's the Huddle room where it's this little 40-inch display. The table's pushed up right against it. Here's some comfortable bar stools and a Polycom. And that's it. Where in the boardroom, here's these great, Shure MXA ceiling tile microphones, and the lighting's got a little bit more robust. It's got it's got that feel to it. So there's definitely a stark difference, and I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think you need that type of room. And
to some variety, yeah, absolutely.
And you just had a bunch of Huddle rooms. It gets a little stale, right?
But I think that the tasks for each one of those rooms are different, right? So you go into a conference room or a meeting room, you're generally going and showing a PowerPoint of some sort of information. So you're informing people of predefined information. When you're going into a Huddle space or a collab space, you're analyzing data. You're coming up with solutions. You're collaborating. You're solving problems.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's like lecture versus true collaboration between colleagues.
And you build that in too. So I mean, I've done probably a dozen meeting rooms that had their traditional, screen at the end or projection at the end with the high-end, like audio and video experience. Mm-hmm. But don't forget, there's usually a credenza on the side of that. So we've also built sideways rooms in the same room where if you're using it as a meeting room, it's this way. And if you're using it as a collaborating room, there's two screens on the side. Sometimes they're just projecting art, so it would be kind of like projection on the long way and LEDs on the sideway, or LCDs on the sideway, where that's art and it's potato chips and soda for the lunch meeting. But it's all about chair height too at that point, where everyone sits on one side of the table, and now they have a huge pixel canvas to actually collaborate and work. You don't collaborate in this direction in our spaces, you collaborate on the sideways, but that's how we build our meeting rooms, unless they're very high end, and it's all about the fit and the furnishing.
Yeah, that's cool. I think the comment about the social expectations when you go into those spaces, how they change immediately when you see that it's a less hierarchical or whatever it might be, has an interesting side effect though, because there is I talk about this a lot, about the cost of a meeting. You can basically graph it. What's the cost of the real estate? What's the cost of the copper that goes into that space? And for 1 hour, what is that amortized going to cost you? But there's also a social setup and social teardown cost that tends to happen in more formal spaces. I mean, everybody here has been to a meeting where, it's big, glorious doors and a lot of official, stuff getting set up. And there's technology costs to get the meeting fired up, but there's also the social convention that has to flow forward for 8 to 9 minutes about, hi, who are you? Let's exchange something important. And then when you want to leave, you have to do the same thing. You got to pay that again. If you look at what happens in Huddle spaces, I'll be meeting with my engineers in my office with Solstice on the wall, and they'll go, oh, I'm going to get a call, and they just wander off. And I'm thinking, it doesn't matter. We'll collaborate in 20 minutes down the hall in a different Huddle space if I see that person, right? More seamless. It kind of goes back to the less boundaries between start and stops of meetings. Your day isn't just a drumbeat of, I'm going to accomplish this with these people and this with these next people. That's transformed quite a bit. It's more of a seamless fabric of collaboration, and now I'm doing personal work, and I'm moving back into that in a transitional area even, right?
It almost does make you wonder, though, whether or not we transition our traditional meeting spaces to large Huddle spaces, where you get rid of the table, and it's more like meeting in your living room the way Huddle's been. They're just
Well,
larger, more
I've noticed
sophisticated.
you guys have done that in a couple spaces here. It looks like
I did too.
there are small tables that can be pushed together to be more formal, but they look like they could be rearranged on
It's
demand.
actually, we're looking at, with a lot of conference, and this came from our sales team, was flexible furniture in conference rooms. So instead of your traditional fixed boardroom table, being able to convert those spaces to maybe a small collaborative thing, or it could be a lecture style where we set it up in theater as well. I think one point to notice, and we talked about this, like the Huddle space, maybe you don't ever even use the technology, you just gather. I think there's an expectation in a conference room or a boardroom that you're going to utilize, there's going to be heavy technology utilization. The Huddle room expectation, maybe we are, maybe we just need to sit somewhere and work on a whiteboard for an hour.
Right.
We've changed up some of our video rooms as well. You know, most recently we did a whole remodel of our third floor in Minneapolis. And so traditionally our video rooms are 2 monitors, you know, the conference room table, we've all seen them. So this particular room is 3 monitors across, couches, bar top seating, and it's just, people absolutely love the new way of doing video conferences in there, because it's different. It's not that formal. You walk in, you got this 30-foot table that's, you know, 15 feet wide, and you know, you're going to sit there and try and have a meeting. It's our answer to creating a less formal environment in a video.
Interesting.
Cool.
So last question from me, and then I'd like to open it up to questions from our audience. You know, I think we all are curious about what the future holds. We've made a lot of progress in this industry in the last 4 or 5 years, but what problems do you see that have to be surmounted to get to that next level, that next future kind of picture of collaboration technology? What do we have to solve? Pick one.
Well, pick one. I'll tell you an
I can see the
anecdote.
gears
No,
turning
I'll
in
tell
your
you an
head.
anecdote. For years, our staff, who identify as AV, wanted to go to Infocom, right? Because Infocom was the place where you'd learn what all the pro AV stuff is, and every year you'd see incremental changes to that. And when I joined the team, I said, guys, what about CES, right? So you use the technology at work, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours a day, tops, and you're using your phone, you're using your television, your entertainment center, you're talking to your Alexa all day, all night long. So you're spending so much more time around technology in your car, in your house, than you ever are using the technology in work. But then why is the work technology so hard to use? So I think the thing that we're missing is really looking at the consumer behavior. And it's not just a matter of making it easier, it's making it interoperable. It makes the handoff type of things. Right. You know, to say, if I can wake up and ask my Alexa, what's the weather today, what's on my schedule, and did the Phillies win? Why can't I walk into my office and say, you know, call my wife to my work phone, or in a conference room say, hey, bring up my session from 2 weeks ago. You know, and start off. I mean, we had this discussion before this started.
Right.
The other part is that when a conference or a meeting is over, it's not over. It just ended because you ran out of time in the room. So what we're missing is the ability to kind of like close up the portfolio, and the next time we're together again, to open it up where we left off. Because again, it's about that time getting back to started. How much time is it to say, where did we save that? I emailed that out to everybody. Who has the latest version? Right. You know, so work happens in a meeting between the meetings. And even when I say about the portfolio opening, it didn't end when you closed it at the end of that meeting. Things have happened. People have added knowledge and added activity to that kind of thing. But that thing isn't portable. So I think that's
that's great.
It's kind of like the next thing for me would be
Persistent rooms, and, you know, project-related persistent rooms. So yeah, we did have this discussion before, and you know, there's a lot of really great technology out there, and you can integrate this technology, but you're taking a lot of complicated technology, you're putting it together in a room, and you're going, here you go, end user. And yeah, they have TVs, and but they're confused. And so I think if we can, if the industry can develop a better way of controlling complex technology that's as easy to use as a phone, that's where I really think it needs to go. It needs to be the phone. You need to, because here's the thing. You can deploy the best technology in the world, and it does this, that, and washes the dishes and everything else. But if you're not getting the adoption from it, you throw it out the window. Nobody's using it. It has to be easy to use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you make the phone example, because if you think about the reliability you have on your cellular device versus AV technologies, which probably cost 3 times as much you've paid for your cellular device, are insane. Like, it really highlights the value that you're getting in a Galaxy or an iPhone, whichever user you end up using. I've had my phone for 2 years, and I'm a kind of run it into the ground before you upgrade kind of guy, and I have no reason to upgrade after 2 years. I mean, and it's doing, I use it every minute of every day. So I think reliability is a huge component of that, and how we, making sure we're creating value in the products and we're making products that last. What's great about you guys is that you're a software company, not a hardware company. You were talking about it. There's an issue, we make a tweak in the user experience in the UI. If there's utilization we're seeing that we weren't getting before, we can make that change without having to totally revamp the hardware. And I think biggest thing is the AV-IT convergence and what security looks like and how we manage security. I mean, for us, different clients in-house in the same building, utilizing different networks that want to all utilize Solstice and Huddle rooms, and what does that look like, and what device is communicating to what, and then us trying to communicate to our clients of, no, well, this stuff is segmented, and them saying, well, but they can connect to a Solstice device, and I can connect to a Solstice device, so theoretically, can't we all connect? And then that becomes a challenge, especially for some of our financial clients and enterprise grade.
I think the popular technology is the technology that kind of fits into your day seamlessly. You're not thinking about it.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
But when I hear you, one of the things that occurs to me because I agree with you, I think that is the big challenge. A lot of the stuff we have at home is better than the stuff we have at work. But compliance, network security is it's a big obstacle. And a lot of the technology we use at home is not constrained by, we were in meetings this morning and we spent the whole meeting not talking about the user experience, but talking about how do we comply with their security policies.
Yeah,
it's a big challenge.
I tend to think about it as the technology and the enterprise constraints and all that stuff that you have to solve. It's probably 80% of our product, to be honest. It's, QoS on the network, and can you support multiple VLANs to the pod, and how can you guarantee security and penetration tests and all those things? How do you update a pod seamlessly from a single console? And how do you do a global rollout or pull analytics, all that stuff? But what you have to be careful with is if the technology isn't transparent, it's what you're hinting at, Matt, I think, that as I move throughout my day, the only part of the user experience I want is the UI, the elegant UI. Think about when you use your phone. How often in the last 2 years have you thought about the technology of phones? Almost never. But if you're in an AV environment, often, vendors will say stuff like, well, that's because the signal strength, this did this or that. It's like, I don't want to know that. Yeah. My users certainly don't want to be exposed to the core technology and the science. That's our job, to make that go away for the user so they never see it or hear about it or anything. And, a lot of people will fall into those traps, especially small companies, startups full of smart engineers and all that. They'll want to, hey, that's an awesome streaming algorithm we have. We have a proprietary streaming algorithm, and we never talk about it. It's like it should never be part of the discussion. You should be able to push 30 hertz wirelessly to a screen in random Wi-Fi environments, full stop. No one wants to hear about how smart we were when we made that happen for the government or whatever. That heritage, it's gone. It's really about, I came to the meeting, and I want to click a button and see my stuff happen up there the way I would if there was a cable, but now I get all this freedom.
Don't care how it works, just make it work, right?
Yeah, well, it's got to be transparent.
But on the security side, if you think about your phone, there's a lot of personal stuff you want to do it. I was explaining the kind of the difference between a focus room, a huddle room, and a meeting room would be if you are my best friend, you could stand over my shoulder and I would be completely comfortable you looking at my screen. Right. That's collaboration. Right. If it's my best friend and his friend, there's 1 degree of separation, but there's trust still there. I might pass my phone around as long as they don't linger and try to open up another app, and I'll be like, what are you doing? But then once you get like that next person in there, intimacy's gone. Yeah. And intimacy security at the same time, too. So you then want to share a screen to collaborate because you don't want to let go of your personal device, which is security too. So on the corporate side, well, I'm from academia, but we have a lot of compliance with user data, right? So student data, research data, that's where we spend a lot of time securing it. But if you've already secured the laptop down to it, and as you know, a pretty rigorous process of approving software and hardware from a lot of different, we have a scorecard. Security is just one of the things on the scorecard. Convenience is another need. People really need this technology. So then we assess risk. We don't start with no, we start with the assessment of risk. So a little bit as the IT is always kind of owned AV, but that's for a different discussion, right? But as long as we can prove that your personal ownership of data is secure, then when you get into a collaboration space, that the collaboration is respecting a social boundary, not a technical boundary. And that's how we approach the difference. That's how we approach security versus collaboration.
That's a good point.
Security is my scorecard at a financial institution. Sure. I mean, it's a long, drawn-out process. Everything needs to be vetted through our security folks, and the companies that do their due diligence and turn over security white papers are the ones that can kind of get pushed through faster. And quite honestly, those are the ones I'm going to start looking at because it's very difficult to get any kind of new application, and we consider anything an application. It doesn't matter if it's a piece of hardware, software, whatever it is, it's an application. You get that put on the network, it's very difficult. And the companies that provide very detailed security information because they've done their due diligence, whether it be through a third party or however they went about it, can provide that kind of documentation. Let's face it, everything plugs into the network now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I liked your description of the room and social convention because I think it also speaks to transparency of the user interface. Because we often get tempted to change the UI to increase security under the covers, and we'll pause and say, wait a minute, that might change that rule about transparency. Because users are exactly doing the shoulder surf thing, or I already have trust with these 5 people in this room. It's a proximate collaboration session. So we always have to go off and invent stuff under the covers that no one ever knows about to make that become the case. If we started from a heritage of lack of trust like the VTC guys had to do because of the telephony heritage that they came from, their user experience suffers from that because it's so in front of you. I mean, think about how often you have to parse through an email like, which of these 500 numbers am I supposed to dial and which code am I supposed to type when? We really re-question all those assumptions because our use case is fundamentally different. It's just come together with people you can see and get collaborating. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.